Assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you for joining us in our national e-invoicing solutions, Fاتورة. This is the technical workshop for Fاتورة, and we're focusing more towards phase 2 of the invoicing solution. So in today's session, we're gonna cover 4 main topics, and I'm gonna give some room for questions and answers. So first of all, we're gonna have a quick introduction to e-invoicing, and then we're gonna have a look at the 2 different models of e-invoicing, and then we're gonna have a look at the requirements of phase 2, which is the subject of today's technical session. And then finally, we're going to have a look at the most common CSID business scenarios. Finally, we're going to give room for the questions and answers. If you have any questions throughout the session, please type them away, and we're going to try to answer them as best as we can by the end of the workshop. So moving forward, let's provide you with a quick introduction on invoicing. So it started back in the 4th of December of 2020. ZACA has published the invoicing regulation to the public. 6 months after that, we have published the implementation regulation, which contained all the detailed requirements, specification, and so on and so forth for what's expected from the taxpayers to implement. By 4th of December of 2021, we have launched the generation phase, which we're going to talk about what does it entail. And by July 22nd of 2020, we have announced the first integration wave to give the first wave 6 months head start to start integrating. And the enforcement started this week by January 1st. And we have also announced by late of December the wave 2 as well. So wave 2 will have also 6 months to start integrating. So enforcement will start by mid of this year. So what is the difference between phase 1 and phase 2? So phase 1, we're talking about the generation phase, which started back in 2021, 4th of December. In that phase, we wanted to convert from converting invoices through, let's say, manual means or by handwriting to an electronic way. So taxpayers, like all required VAT taxable persons, were required to generate and store compliant tax invoices and notes through electronic solutions. The enforcement started back on December 4th, 2021. So the key requirement was, as we mentioned, that the taxpayers would have to generate and store the invoices in electronic format. There was some extra requirement when it comes to the fields that are expected in the new form, mainly the QR code for simplified invoices or the BTC. However, in the next wave, which is the integration, things will get more technical. So as we mentioned that for wave 1, the enforcement started from 1st of January of this year. Wave 2 is going to start enforcement from 1st of July of this year as well. So each wave announced will have 6 months head start to start being compliant with ZACA requirements. So the difference between phase 1 and phase 2 when it comes to the technicalities, in terms of generation and storage, now we are enforcing the format of the invoice. It has to be an XML or a PDF/A3 with an embedded XML. And we have provided all the documents detailing the requirements for these types of format. We also added some more fields to ensure the security and integrity of the invoices. One example of that is the cryptographic stamp. And finally, we are also requiring the taxpayers to integrate with ZACA platform. So we have 2 models, and we're going to have a look at them, which is the first one, we call it the clearance model. This is targeted to B2B or business to business. The second one, which is a reporting or simplified invoices, which is the targeted to B2C or business to consumers. So who will be subject to the implementation of phase 2? So as we mentioned, phase 2 is going to be done in waves. We have announced wave 1 and wave 2. Wave 1 enforcement started this week and will continue for 6 months. Wave 2 will start 1st of July and will continue until the end of the year. So we're making sure that each taxpayer that is announced as part of the wave will have enough time to prepare their environment to be compliant with ZACA. Now, of course, this doesn't stop anyone that is not being announced in these waves to also start integrating. We actually encourage that just to give you more time to prepare your environment. We believe that all the tools that we have provided, which we'll go through this in this workshop, will make this journey as smooth as possible. So in a nutshell, to be compliant with phase 2, so what you need to do is that you need to make sure that your solutions are connected to the internet, because as we mentioned, you need to send these invoices to ZACA platform. We have also added some additional field requirements, and you can find the documentations on our website through the detailed general guidelines. And of course, you need to generate and store the required invoices in the formats that we have mentioned, which is an XML or a PDF/A3 with an embedded XML. And then finally, you have to integrate with the invoicing solution of Zatka to show said invoices. So let's have a look at the two models that are intending in the invoices. So we have two main models. We have the simplified invoices, which is targeted toward business to customers, which is the B2C, and the second one, which is we call it the standard tax invoice, which is targeted towards the B2B or business to business. Here are some examples for each type. So how would the model differ when it comes to integration with Zatka? So for the first model, which is the standard invoice, which is business to business or B2B. So first of all, the supplier would need to generate the invoice. The invoice needs to be shared with Zatka platform. Zatka is going to clear the invoice, meaning that we're going to run some validation, and then we're going to stamp the invoice for you, and then we're going to generate a QR code for you to be printed on the invoice, and then share it back with you. Once it is cleared, you need to store this cleared invoice in your systems, and only then you can share it with your buyer. So sharing it, depends on how you agree with the buyer. However, it has to be compliant with Zatka format. Finally, since the invoice will have a QR code, the buyer will also have the ability to scan the QR code to make sure that this is a Zatka compliant QR code through using the Zatka mobile app. This is an example of how the invoice would look like in a printable version. So you can see we have the QR code, we have the invoice type, whether it's simplified or standard. You're going to have the reference number, you have the stamp, the date and time stamp. You have the information about the seller, and then an information about the buyer, which is a critical now in phase 2. Previously, it wasn't mandatory. Now you have to mention what is the information about the seller. For example, you have to provide, for example, the commercial registration number of the seller and the buyer as well. Now we also have the details of the invoice, each line item of what's being sold, what is the unit price, the quantity, the total before tax percentage, and then the value of the tax, and then the overall total. You can find the same information as well below. Now, when it comes to BTC or the simplified invoice, the difference here is that the supplier can share the invoice in a human-readable format immediately with the customer. They don't need to share it in real time with Zatka, or they don't need to clear it. So they have to share it in a human-readable format with the format that we have specified, and they have to store that in the same format that they have generated. And then they're going to have a grace period of 24 hours to share said generated invoice with Zatka platform. Of course, similarly, the customer will also have the ability to scan the QR code that is printed on the invoice, and they can validate whether this is a compliant or Zatka compliant invoice or not. So the main difference is that in the first model we have seen is in real time, and invoices cannot be shared with the customers or with the buyer unless it was created with Zatka. However, in the simplified, we understand the let's say criticality of the time sensitiveness of the transaction. So we are giving a grace period of 24 hours for the generated invoices to be submitted to Zatka invoicing platform. This is again an example of a simplified invoice. Maybe the most notable change or difference between this one and the previous one is that here you will not find the buyer information, only the seller information will be printed here. Moving next to phase 2 requirements, we're going to have a deep dive on those requirements. So we have published numerous, let's say, material and tools to help you and guide you through this implementation. So when it comes to the documentation, we have published the invoicing resolution, the data dictionary for all the fields that are in the invoice, XML implementation standard, the security features implementation, and then finally the API specification in form of Swagger file. This is how to connect with Zatka platform and submit your invoices. As for tools, we have provided the compliance and enablement toolbox, which is the SDK. We're going to have a look at it shortly. And then we have provided also the integration sandbox as a sandbox to test the integration before you connect your devices to our production platform. Finally, we have also published like a simplified guide on how to generate the QR code. So this is how we envision a journey would look like from a taxpayer or service provider point of view to be integrating with ZK invoicing platform. So we have 4 major steps. The first 2 are optional, however, they are very encouraged to be used. The third one and the fourth one are mandatory, of course. So the first one is, this is on the taxpayer side to make sure that their solutions are able to generate this. So we have provided the compliance and enablement toolbox in the form of SDK. And also there is a portal-based validator that we're going to see. You can validate that the XML that you are generating is compliant with ZK platform. The next step is that you can use the integration sandbox to test the APIs that we have exposed, in addition to the portal-based validator, as we have mentioned previously. These 2 are optional and will help you make sure that your solutions are compliant with ZK before you start onboarding your devices to ZK platform. So once you have gone through these 2 prerequisites or preparation phases, then you can go and log in into faatura.zk.gov.sa, which is the Faatura platform portal. There you will be able to onboard and register your e-invoice generation solution or AGS units. This can be in a form of a cash register or an ERP system or accounting system, whichever system that you're using that to generate need to be onboarded individually here. Once onboarded, then you'll be able to go to the last stage, which is sending the actual invoices, debit, credit notes to ZK for clearance and reporting. So let's zoom in into the first one, which is the compliance and enablement. To access the compliance and enablement toolbox, you have 2 options. First of all, you can log into the developer portal. There you'll either download the developer software development kit, the SDK, and use it to validate through either command line or through integrating it with your IDE to make sure that your invoices are being generated in the proper manner. The second way is that we have also provided in the same developer portal a portal-based validator, so you can drag and drop the XMLs that you have generated to run a validation on the portal on the website, and will give you instant feedback whether the document is compliant with ZK or not. Another way to access it is that you can go to our main portal, zk.gov.sa. We have dedicated a section for developer. There you can also download the same SDK and use it in a very similar way as we have mentioned previously. So here are a few heads up on the steps to use the SDK. So depending on the environment, once you download the SDK, then you will be able to unzip it and you're going to find 2 install files. So depending on the environment, if you're using Windows, you're going to run the install.bat, or if you're using Linux or Mac, you're going to use the install.sh. Of course, to run the SDK, you have to have at least a version of Java between 11 and 15. And to ensure that you have successfully installed, you can run the command faatura-help. That will give you a preview of all the commands that can be used by this tool. Some examples of how to use the SDK. So this is from a command line point of view. So the first command that you can see here is to validate the invoice. And here we're passing the command. So we're typing faatura-validate, and then we're passing the XML file to be used. Once you've done that, you're gonna return some results, and based on those results, you'll be able to know whether this has been successful or not. So you can see here at the bottom that the validation has been passing correctly. Another command that you will also be able to use, which is the sign. This is for signing the invoice, provided that you're providing the key and the certificate in this path. So here is an example of how it would look like. You're gonna run faatura-sign-invoice, and then you'll pass the XML file name, and then we're gonna run the command and it will sign it for you. You can find here at the end that the invoice has been signed successfully, along with the hash that has been generated by this signature. Next, this is how we're going to generate the private key and the CSR. So you run the command faatura-csr. They're going to pass it the configuration file. Here in our example, it's the csr-config-example.properties. And then we're going to specify where do you want the output to be as a path. And here we're saying that it's going to be in this path. And then finally, we're going to pass the command of the private key output. So the key and the CSR is going to be outputted in 2 different locations. And this is how the result would look like. And this is the final output private key. This private key, how it would look like in the end. Another example is Faatura -sign invoice request invoice standard invoice. So once you have created the key and the certificate, this is how you can invoice. And you can find the command at the top, and you can find a sample result on how it will look like and the end result. So here by the end, you're going to find that the invoice has been signed successfully. Once it is passed successfully, this means that you have a compliant invoice and can be shared with Zatka. So this is a quick run over the SDK. Of course, once you download the SDK, there is a user manual with all the details regarding the commands and the expected outputs for each command. You'll all will be found in the manual. Also, we have published a series of videos, social media to run you through all of these components to help you and guide you to use each single one with some examples and some demos. So the next phase is the integration sandbox. Here in the integration sandbox, the aim is to do an actual integration in a sandboxed environment. So this is not a production. This is some sort of a test environment to make sure that your system is able to connect with Zatka systems. So the way to access is that we're going to log into sandbox.zatka.gov.sa. And from that page, we're going to have access to the API documentation. We have 6 main APIs. We're going to have a look at them. And then you'll be able to simulate the integration code. So we're going to do some test onboarding requests. For example, you can do test of submission of the standards and simplified invoices, and you'll be able to test a certificate renewal request as well, all through the same environment. Of course, this is via Swagger. So on the portal itself, you can post or upload the, let's say, the commands that you want to run or the API codes that you want to run, and you can run it on the portal itself to validate them. It doesn't have to be system to system. You can do it on the portal. However, we encourage to do it system to system to see how the two systems are integrating and communicating properly. So these are the list of the APIs that we are exposing. There are 6 APIs. So in sequence, what you need to do is, first of all, you need to onboard the device. And to onboard the device, first of all, you have to issue a compliance CSID API. And this API, we're going to submit the CSRs. We're going to have a look at it to test the backend system of Zatka to start the onboarding process. So this one is used. The result of this one will provide you some sort of a key to be used for the subsequent calls. So once you obtain the CSID, the compliance CSID, you're going to call the second one, which is to run the. And these APIs we're going to validate sample invoices from your system to make sure that they are compliant with Zatka. So once you receive the CSID, you're going to call using the same CSID to run a compliance check. You're going to pass a test XML for an invoice that you have generated from your system. If this passed, then you're going to go to the next one, which is the actual onboarding. Here you're going to request a production CSID API. So you're converting the compliance CSID into a production one. Once you have received the production, this is a confirmation that your devices can start issuing invoices through API 5 and 6. So 5 is for the reporting API, as we mentioned previously. This is the B2C, and 6 is for the clearance APIs. We have also provided a renewal for the CSID that you have issued in step 3. In step 3, the CSID that you will have an expiry date. So you can also automate the renewal. It doesn't have to be manual. You can also automate it through this command as well. So as part of the first one, which is the submitting the compliance CSID, you need to provide the CSR, which is certificate signed request. In the CSR, you will have to fill information regarding your organization, the device that you are using, and the type of invoices that this device is generating. So all the details, of course, can be found in our website and our documentation. Here we have posted them just to give you a high-level explanation about each one of them. Of course, all these details are required per device. So each device will have to request a CSR. We're going to have a look at the different, let's say, business scenarios when to generate a CSR and when not to generate a CSR. So once you have done the step 2, which is the integration sandbox, and you make sure that your system is able to communicate with Zatka platform, then and only then you'll be able to start onboarding your actual devices. So this is a production environment. Make sure you're only using this environment to onboard your actual production environment that are used to generate the real transaction. So to access that, we're going to have to go to faatura.gov.sa. And for devices, we're going to have to onboard them one by one or through, let's say, mass. I think we have like a limit of 100 devices per onboarding request. So each device will have to generate an OTP. This OTP will be the solution that you're using, the electronic generation solution or the invoicing generation solution. Once it is onboarded, then you'll be able to issue the certificate request, signing request, and then we're going to do the compliance checks as we have mentioned. Once you pass that, and then you'll be able to start issuing submitting your invoices. So these two steps, which is the OTP and the input, this can be if your system is able to, let's say, automate the OTPs and the input of the OTPs. This can be automated, doesn't have to be manual. This is up to you as a taxpayer or solution provider, depending on the solution that you're using. These are the four APIs that we have mentioned previously. Steps in sequence: compliance CSID to submit for the compliance checks. Once you have passed the checks, they'll be able to produce a production CSID. This is the onboarding step. And then later on, once the CSID is expired, you can renew it through this command. Of course, the compliance checks depends on the type of invoices or business scenario that this unit is generating. So if you're dealing with B2C only, you're going to do a compliance check for simplified. If you're doing B2B only, you're going to do the standard documents for clear compliance checks. And if the same device is doing both, then you have to do the compliance checks for both of them. Here is a snapshot of the Faatura portal and how to, let's say, request OTPs. So as mentioned, I believe you can have up to 100 OTPs generated at the same time. You can copy these OTPs and then input them into your EGS to process. Here we have a sample of the commands that are used. So the first command is for the compliance CSID and how to request it. So basically, this is how the request would look like. So you can see here the OTP is being sent as part of the request. Also, you have to pass the CSR information that we have mentioned before in the request, as you can see here. This is, of course, encoded using base 64. Once you do it, then going to be the result of that is going to be a binary security token. This token will be used for the subsequent steps to ensure the sequence of the API calls. Here we're going to have a compliance API request for simplified or reporting. This is how it would look like. So you're passing the invoice, you're passing some other parameters, as you can see here. You pass also the CSID that you have generated from the PFS request, which is the security token. And then we're going to have a result which tell you whether you have passed the compliance check or not. And if there is any issue, we're going to have the message itself will tell you exactly what is the issue. If there is any XSD validator issue, or if there is any business rule issue, it's going to be displayed as failed. This is the same thing, but this is for standard clearance. They're very similar to each other. And this is how to request the production CSID. So once you have passed the previous check, which is the compliance check, then you'll be able to request the production CSID and complete your onboarding process. So after this call is passed, we're going to have the actual production CSID. This is the one. This can be used for your real transaction that is being generated by this unit. So by the end of this step, your device is now onboarded and we have verified that it's compliant with ZATCA requirement. Then and only then you'll be able to send your actual invoices. So it's a pretty straightforward. Your onboarded devices will be able to send either standard documents or simplified documents or both, depending on the type of business transaction that this unit is generating. We have two APIs I've mentioned, reporting API and clearance APIs. We're going to run validations. And in the case of clearance, which is used for B2B, we're going to return the stamp for you and the QR code to be printed on your standard invoices. So this is in a nutshell what are the phase 2 requirements in general for the phase 2 invoicing program. Now we'll have a look at the most common CSID business scenarios and when it is expected to generate the CSID. So as a rule of thumb, CSID should be generated by either the issuing system or by the sender system. So in the very first scenario that we see in front of us, this is the most simpler one, which is that the taxpayer side has only one system or one server that is issuing the invoice and sending the invoice to Zatka. So in this case, you only need to issue one CSID for this server to start communicating with Zatka. Another scenario we have, which is like, for example, if the taxpayer has a branch and each branch will have, let's say, multiple points of sales, and these points of sales are generating and sending the invoices to Zatka. So each single point of sale will have to have its own unique CSID to start issuing and sending the invoicing to Zatka environment. Another example is that if the taxpayer branch will have some sort of a centralized server, and this server is issuing and sending the invoice to in that case, you don't need to issue a CSID for the point of sale because the point of sale is acting like as a channel. However, the actual generation and sending of the invoice resides in the taxpayer's, let's say, centralized server. In that case, you will only need to generate one CSID. No need for the individual point of sales to have their own CSIDs. Similar scenario, however, in this scenario, we can see that the point of sale is issuing. However, the centralized server is sending. So in that case, since the point of sale is issuing, then they have to have their own unique CSIDs. And the server itself that is also sending will have to have its own CSID. So as we have mentioned before, so since this point of sale is issuing, then they have to have the CSID. And this one is sending, then it has to have its own CSID. Another more complex scenario where we have some sort of a taxpayer with multiple branches and let's say a regional, let's say server. So in that case, the point of sales are not generating, they are just as a channel to generate. So we have, let's say, a branch server where it is issuing and sending, even though it's not sending it to Zatka directly, it's sending it to a centralized server at some sort of a centralized location. Then the one that is issuing will have to have a CSID and the one that is sending will have the CSID. And since these ones are not issuing or sending, then they don't need to have any CSID generated for them. So this is in a nutshell our presentation today. So if you have any questions, please type to answer them as much as I can. Anything that we're not able to answer now, we're going to capture and make sure that we are communicating it to the participants or through our different social channels. So the first question we have, does the clearance process include signing process or it just adds the certificate information to the tax invoice and the document will need to be signed by the system as it has a private key which is not shared because it's mentioned in the simplified tax invoice needs a separate digital signing process done. So does the tax invoice require separate digital signing process or just need to be cleared without adding the digital? No, you have to add the digital signature. So from Zatka point of view, we're gonna stamp it for you, and then we're gonna generate a QR code based on your input. So you have to do the same thing from your side when it comes to generation. You have to add the same private key and the CSR information or CSID information from your side and pass it through the invoice. Another question is that, is it mandatory to use the same labels in human readable invoices, PDF, such as the seller buyer information? I would refer to the documentation that we have and the data dictionary and see what are the, let's say, the valid format for each field that we have. can we use the compliance and enablement toolbox invoice? Currently, this compliance and enablement toolbox is stamping the invoice with a sample signature. So the SDK itself comes with a sample signature. However, you can use the same one, but you have to generate your own CSR request, and then you can use the SDK, and you can embed the SDK into your environment, your IDE, your integrated development environment, to use it for. But make sure that you're not using the samples, that you're using your own real information, like your organization name, your organization information, the model number. All this has to be in proper manner, not use the sample ones. So another question is that I understand that all the taxpayers who fall in wave 2 or phase 2 should be ready till 30th of June 2023. In coming 6 months, taxpayer will be asked by Zata to integrate with Fاتورة platform. The final date is, I believe, so I'm not sure if it is 1st of January or end of December. However, you'll have 6 months. So the enforcement will start from 1st of July of 2023 or end of June 2023 until end of 23. The sandbox environment onboarding process does not store the CSID generated, always return the sample piece CSID on. How can we fully test the onboarding? Okay, this is a great question. So what we have done is that if you go back to the journey, so what we have done, we have replicated this environment, which is the Fاتورة platform, and we created a simulation environment. In that simulation environment, you'll be able to test the end-to-end journey for your onboarding, to similar to the production one, to make sure that you are fully, let's say, compliant with the steps that we are providing. So the simulation portal is also live to test the end-to-end journey of your onboarding as well. Can you share with us a Postman collection with the request headers and details? So if you go to the developer portal, you're going to have the Swagger file, and Swagger files will have samples and them as well. You can run it on the portal itself. We'll have all the required information. Is the CSID used in sending invoices is the same one as the one onboarding? So if you're referring to the production CSID, then yes. So if you go back to the steps, so this CSID is used for compliance to complete the second step. The third step, which is the production CSID, this is the one that is going to be used to send your invoices. So for Wave 2 announcement, they have been announced, I believe, like 1 week ago. And you'll find the details of that announcement. So, and there has been direct communication to the announced Wave. I believe the threshold of revenue was 500 million, but you can refer to the announcement that Zaka has issued, I believe, last Friday, to refer to the actual announcement threshold or revenue threshold for Wave 2. OTP, what is the method to get it? Via SMS or what? No, so OTP will be generated through the portal. So you can see here on this slide or this screenshot, these are the actual captured, generated on the website itself. You copy this code and then you put it in the in your solution to start your onboarding process. Max number of item lines in the invoice. So if you refer to our documentation, we'll have all the information needed. What is the maximum size? What is the maximum line items, and so on and so forth. Do you have sample PDF A3 with XML sample? I believe the latest SDK that we have published does include these samples, or in the developer portal. Try to download the latest ones and hopefully you'll find them. If not, we're going to make sure to update them as soon as possible. For B2C, as you mentioned, a human readable format can be in form of paper. Of course, it can be in form of paper, yes. طيب بالنسبة للشركة القابضة والتي لديها أكثر من برنامج محاسبي، هل يجب أن أدمجهم بسيرفر للإرسال؟ يعتمد على طريقة الامبلمنتيشن عندكم. إذا أنتم مثلا مسوين سنترلايزيشن في مكان واحد، بس سيرفر واحد يرسلها. إذا لا، كل شركة تابعة للشركة القابضة، لا يصير كل شركة. فيعتمد أنتم كيف طريقة نقول كيف الإرسال، وكيف حتى تسوي سبميت انتو للVAT declaration كمان. We share the link for documentation for developers. So if you go to sandbox.zatka.gov.sa, you're gonna find all the links for the documentation for developers. Also, if you go to our social media, like our YouTube, we're gonna find a series of videos that does go through each component and how to access them and how to use them. And explain how XML is validated. So if you're talking from, can you please clarify, do you mean like from Zatka side, how are we validating them, or from the taxpayer or solution provider side? So at what stage the invoices can submitted to Zatka system for clearance, before invoices paid or after invoice payment? So it has to be before, so at the time of generation. So if you go back to the model of B2B, here you can see that you have to share the invoice with Zatka before even sharing it with your buyers. So make sure that you're clearing it with Zatka, and then and only then, once it is cleared and stamped by Zatka, then you can share it with your buyer, and then they can do the payment. We're reporting to Zatka for B2C invoices. Can they be sent as batch of invoices? Is there any specific limit? Yes, you can. When it comes to limitation, as we have mentioned, go to our website, to our detailed technical specification. You're going to find what sort of limitations do we have regarding the number of invoices or the size of or the payload of the XML that you're sending, or the request that you're sending. أيضا الشركات القابضة والتي لديها أكثر من برنامج محاسبي، هل يجب أن يكون عداد الفاتورة مشترك بين البرامج؟ لا. أهم شيء إنه كل برنامج يحتفظ بنفس السيكونس أو عداد هذا، وما يتقاطعون. لأن في النهاية كل برنامج، إذا كان كل برنامج عليه CSID مختلف، فحتختلف السيكونسز على كل حال. Is performa invoice considered as the invoice for Zatka compliance? Can you elaborate, please, Elias? The CSID issued in production is valid up to 31st of March 2022 with a static dummy VAT number. Because of this, so how did you generate this? Was it using the SDK, or did you issue it yourself using your CSR? Where can we use the simulation environment? Is it separate for each taxpayer after registration? No, it's the same. So if you go to the fatoura.zatka.gov.sa, you're going to find a button that will switch you over to the simulation portal. That button will switch you to the simulation. You can use that simulation, and then on the same simulation portal, there's also a button to switch back to the production one. When we need to report time in UTC, do we need to convert time to the time as UTC and suffix with Z? I believe this is answered in the dictionary that we have published. If you go to the dictionary with all the and XML as well, if you go to those documentation, you'll find exactly what is the format to be used to be submitted. Does your API will produce the hashing of the invoice XML, which will be the PIH for the WPH, which is the previous invoice hash for the next invoice? No, this hash is generated from your side. So you need to keep a sequence of those hashes to make sure that the sequence is intact. For B2B invoices in phase 2, QR code is generated by Zatko, or the invoice solution is generated by Zatko. I can see in step 2, Zatko is going to share back the cleared invoice with the QR code and the Zatko stamp. So we try to validate for phase 2 in SDK with success, but we suppose that the web validator is not ready for phase 2 yet. Display signature error, similar problem with QR code. QR code is validated successfully via SDK, but fails the validation via SDK mobile application. Once again, Zatko sample QR code also fails the validation via. So maybe this is due to using, let's say, sample data, and you're validating against maybe the QR code one is validating against production. So if you can share with us the actual samples that you're using, that you're facing issues, maybe we can validate from our side and get back to you on how to navigate through it. In our system, we collect the invoice information and then we integrate with a payment solution to be paid. My question is, shall we consider it as a real invoice before or after the payment is done? So invoice is upon generation of the invoice. This is then be considered as a real, regardless of the payment. So another question we have is that for holding company, we have 2 ERP systems, yet 2 CSID for each, and what about the counter ICV? So it depends on how your way of implementation. So if your environment is being implemented that these 2 ERPs are either issuing or sending, then each one will have their own CSID. Now, as we mentioned previously, the counter can be maintained separately. Is there a way to get notified if the SDK or Sandbox API version has been updated without logging into Sandbox? This is a very valid request. We're going to have a look at it. Maybe you can send an email to all the registered ones with any update version. However, if you, we request you just to log in frequently and check the version history, you'll be able to track the changes that are happening to these 2 components. Like 5 more minutes for more questions to come. Please keep them coming. We have generated the CSR, and when simplified vouchers raised, then getting a validation wrong signature value. I'm not getting your question. Can you please elaborate? Is there any developer communication channel or chat where we can post technical questions? I believe we have multiple channels, but we're also working on a different channel to ease this communication. We're gonna make sure that it is announced on public. You can share your questions, your technical questions that to be answered. I believe we have an email ID. Maybe the team can share with you the email ID for the time being. Are credit and debit notes required for phase 1? Yes, they are. So again, while generating the CSID in Sandbox pre-production using API, is this CSR valid up to 31st of March 2022 with a static WVAT number? How do we go ahead? Again, it seems that in the Sandbox you're using a pre-configured or sampled CSR, which contains maybe probably like outdated values. But we will look into if there is any other issue in the Sandbox, but I believe it's working fine. So try to check from your side what sort of CSR or what sort of CSR you're using. Can we still cancel and update the performa invoices before starting the payment process? So it's best to use debit and credit notes for any update on the invoice rather than cancellation. Cancellation is not allowed. Can a CSID be generated for a CSR with country other than SA? I believe you can, however, it's best to refer to the documentation and see what are the valid values that are for that field. We're closing the session in 1 minute. Please make sure that you're posting questions. Even if we are not answering them right away, we'll make sure that we either answer them through our communication or through the next session. هل الزام تكون كل حقوق الفاتورة باللغة العربية؟ لا، ما هو الزام. can you make more technical sessions or workshops? Sure, we can. Maybe the next workshop, maybe we can dedicate it for certain components where we actually demo the components themselves. Very valid request. Thank you very much.